HOA tried calling Homeland Security. They came for them instead. This story is one of those unbelievable moments where power, pride, and control turn into a nightmare. It started like any other dispute, but the ending was something no one could have predicted. Imagine this. You're living in a quiet neighborhood, just trying to enjoy your home. You pay your bills, you follow the rules, and you try to keep peace with everyone around you. But then, there's this powerful Homeowners Association, the HOA, that seems to think they own not just the streets, but your entire life. They set rules that make no sense. They send letters for tiny things. And if you even dare question them, they act like your problem. Now, this HOA wasn't just strict. They were aggressive. They were the kind of board that wanted to remind you every single day that they had power. And when someone challenged that power, they didn't fight fair. They fought dirty. Here's where it gets wild. Instead of working out issues like normal people, instead of sitting down and talking things through, this HOA tried to do something shocking. They thought they could scare a resident by making a call, not to the police, not to city officials, but a Homeland Security. Yes, you heard that right. Homeland Security. Think about that for a second. What kind of arrogance does it take to pick up the phone and call one of the most powerful agencies in the country over a neighborhood issue? Who does that? But that's exactly what this HOA did. They wanted to crush their opponent. They wanted to show the entire community that if you dared to stand up to them, you would pay the price. But here's the twist. Instead of destroying the resident, instead of Homeland Security marching in and dragging someone away, the plan backfired. It backfired in the worst way possible for the HOA. Homeland Security showed up, yes, but not for the homeowner. They came for the HOA. The story spread like wildfire in the neighborhood. People whispered about it at backyard barbecues. They gossiped about it at the local coffee shop. Everyone wanted to know, how did the most powerful board in the community suddenly become the target of the very agency they tried to weaponize? Let's rewind. Because to really understand the chaos, you need to know how this HOA worked. They weren't just strict about lawns or paint colors. They were bullies with a boardroom. They fined people for parking in the wrong spot for 5 minutes. They sent threatening letters if your grass grew a little too high. And they loved reminding homeowners that rules are rules. But one homeowner had enough. They started asking questions. They wanted transparency. They wanted to know where the HOA fees were going. And the more they asked, the more uncomfortable the board became. Instead of answering with honesty, the HOA turned hostile. They started targeting this person. Letters, fines, threats, anything they could do to break their spirit. And then came the call. The board thought, we'll end this once and for all. Let's report them to Homeland Security. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But power can twist people. When people are used to control, they start believing they can do anything. So, Homeland Security received a complaint. But here's the thing about powerful government agencies. They don't just take someone's word and act blindly. They investigate. They dig deep. And when they started digging, what they found was not what the HOA expected. Instead of finding a dangerous homeowner, they started uncovering shady practices inside the HOA itself. Financial irregularities, misuse of funds, maybe even fraud. The same people who wanted to ruin a neighbor suddenly had a spotlight shining on them. And that spotlight was not friendly. Imagine the shock. Imagine the fear in that boardroom when officials started asking questions they never thought anyone would ask. Imagine the panic when Homeland Security showed up. Not for the resident they wanted to crush, but for the leaders sitting at the head of the HOA table. The bullies had called in the biggest kid on the playground. And now, the bully was the one being dragged away. Neighbors couldn't believe it. Some were stunned. Some were secretly cheering. For years, people had felt trapped under the HOA's control. And now, justice was finally showing up. People started talking about freedom again. About finally being able to breathe in their own homes without feeling watched, judged, and fined for every little thing. But let's pause here, because this story isn't just about one HOA. It's about power. It's about what happens when people let control get to their heads. It's about arrogance and the belief that rules don't apply to the rule makers. The truth is, this could happen anywhere. Anytime a group has too much unchecked power, the temptation to abuse it grows. And when they finally push too far, when they overstep so badly that the very system they try to exploit turns on them, that's when justice comes crashing down. Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever dealt with someone who thought they were untouchable? Someone who believed they could twist the rules in their favor forever? At first, it feels like they're unstoppable. But deep down, you know one thing. The bigger the ego, the harder the fall. And that's exactly what happened here. The HOA wanted control. They wanted fear. But instead, they got exposure. The resident they tried to destroy, suddenly, they weren't the villain. They were the survivor, the fighter, the one who stood tall while the board crumbled. And the HOA, they weren't just embarrassed. They were under investigation. This is where the story gets even more human. Imagine the emotions of the homeowner. For months, maybe years, they had been battling this board, feeling alone, feeling like the whole world was against them, maybe even wondering if it was worth it. And then, suddenly, the tables turned. Imagine that moment when they realized Homeland Security wasn't there to take them away. They were there to bring justice to the very people who had caused them so much pain. Relief, vindication, power shifting in the blink of an eye. The bullies had finally been exposed. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The fight wasn't over. Investigations take time. People in power don't give up easily. But the tide had changed, and everyone in the community knew it. The whispers turned into cheers. The fear turned into hope. And for the first time in years, homeowners looked at each other and thought, maybe we can take back our neighborhood. This wasn't just about one victory. It was about a movement. A reminder that no matter how strong someone thinks they are, no matter how powerful they appear, if they abuse that power, it will eventually come back to haunt them. So what do we take from this? Simple. Never underestimate the power of standing up. Never believe that the bully always wins. Because sometimes when you least expect it, justice walks right through the door. The HOA tried to call Homeland Security, but in the end, they called justice on themselves. Backhand index point right if you found this story shocking and inspiring. Don't forget to hit that like button. Share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more powerful stories. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. When the news spread that Homeland Security wasn't after the homeowner, but instead after the HOA board, the entire neighborhood lit up with shock. People could hardly believe it. It felt like living inside a movie. The very group that had been handing out fines, threatening letters, and acting like kings of the community were suddenly the ones under investigation. It was like watching a bully get caught red-handed in front of the whole school. At first, the HOA tried to act calm. They told residents it was a misunderstanding. They claimed everything was fine, but you could see it in their faces. The fear, the panic, the weight of questions they could no longer avoid. Meetings that used to be full of confidence and threats now felt different. Voices shook, papers rattled, and people in the audience, the same ones who used to sit quietly while being lectured, now leaned forward with boldness. For the first time, the balance of power was shifting. But how did it all unravel so fast? Let's walk through it. When Homeland Security began their investigation, they weren't looking at lawns or fences or paint colors. They were looking at money. They were looking at documents. They were looking at years of decisions that had been hidden behind closed doors. And the more they looked, the more cracks appeared. Homeowners had been paying fees every month, trusting that the money was going to maintain the community. But now, questions rose. Why did expenses not match the accounts? Why were certain payments missing? Why did it feel like funds were being drained, but nothing in the neighborhood ever improved? It didn't take long for suspicions to grow. Fraud, mismanagement, maybe even criminal activity. The irony was almost too much. The HOA had tried to weaponize power against a single homeowner, but instead, they had triggered a spotlight that revealed their own secrets. Neighbors who had once been afraid to speak up started remembering stories. Times they had felt cheated. Times they had seen odd charges. Times they had wondered, but never dared to ask. Now those voices came alive. And Homeland Security was listening. Imagine being one of the board members. For years, you held your head high, barking orders, demanding obedience. And now, agents were questioning you, asking for receipts, looking through records, digging into bank accounts. The walls must have felt like they were closing in. The homeowner, who had been the original target, they suddenly became a symbol of resistance, a quiet hero in the community. People who had once looked at them with suspicion now saw them as brave. They were the one who stood up when no one else did. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a public one. But let's be honest, it wasn't easy. Even with the investigation, the HOA didn't collapse overnight. People in power rarely let go without a fight. There were arguments, legal battles, even attempts to spin the story. The HOA wanted people to believe they were victims of overreach. They wanted to paint themselves as misunderstood, but the evidence kept stacking against them. And every time new details came out, the community's anger grew. Picture the emotions in those moments. Relief mixed with rage. People were relieved that justice was finally catching up. But they were angry too. Angry that they had been controlled and bullied for so long. Angry that their money might have been stolen. Angry that they had allowed fear to silence them for years. It was a storm of emotions, and at the center of it was the truth. The HOA had brought this on themselves. Now let's pause again, because this story isn't just about one neighborhood. It's about human nature. Give someone too much power without accountability, and watch what happens. Rules become weapons. Authority becomes a game. And people forget that leadership is supposed to serve, not control. The HOA had forgotten that. They thought they were above everyone else. But in the end, they were just people. And people who abuse power always pay the price. As weeks turned into months, the investigation dug deeper. Rumors spread that some board members might face charges. Others quietly resigned, hoping to escape the spotlight. The once mighty board was now crumbling. Meetings that used to be filled with fear and silence were now filled with questions and demands. Homeowners wanted answers. They wanted their money accounted for. They wanted justice. And for the first time, they weren't afraid to ask. The neighborhood itself began to change. Without the heavy hand of the HOA breathing down their necks, people started to feel free again. Kids played in the streets without parents worrying about letters about noise complaints. Families painted their houses without fearing fines for the wrong shade. People parked without worrying about being threatened with towing. It was like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. And through it all, one lesson kept repeating. Arrogance destroys itself. The HOA had thought they were untouchable. They had believed they could call Homeland Security, like it was their personal tool. But their arrogance blinded them. They never imagined that the call they made to destroy someone else would end up destroying them. Think about that for your own life. How many times have you seen someone misuse power? A boss at work, a leader in a group, a person who thinks the rules apply to everyone but themselves. It might look like they're winning for a while. It might look like they'll never be caught. But stories like this remind us of a simple truth. Justice has a way of showing up when you least expect it. The resident who stood up never wanted a war. They just wanted fairness. They wanted honesty. They wanted to live in peace in their own home. And in the end, their courage brought change, not just for themselves, but for every neighbor who had been silently suffering. They became the proof that one voice can spark something bigger. So what happened to the HOA? Reports say some members faced heavy questioning. Some stepped down. Some might never escape the shadow of that investigation. Their reputation, their pride, their power, all gone. And the neighborhood? It became stronger. Because when fear leaves, courage grows. Neighbors began organizing. They started talking about building a new system, one that worked for people, not against them. Trust started to rebuild, brick by brick. The nightmare was turning into a new beginning. And that's why this story matters. It's not just a wild headline about Homeland Security and an HOA. It's about justice. It's about hope. It's about what happens when people refuse to stay silent. The HOA tried to use fear as a weapon, but fear can only last so long. Truth, courage, and unity, those are stronger. And in the end, they are what bring freedom. So, next time you feel small, next time someone makes you believe you can't fight back, remember this story. Remember that even the most powerful can fall. Remember that one voice, one stand, one moment of courage can turn the tables. The HOA tried to call Homeland Security, but what they really did was call their own downfall, and justice answered. Backhand index pointing right if this story inspired you. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. More stories are coming. Stories of power, of courage, and of what happens when people refuse to be silenced. Because a fight for fairness is never over. And you deserve to be part of it.